We didn't go to the seaside that often, but whenever we did, we went by coach from Bolton, and the journey always involved going along Chorley New Road, past what I thought was a castle. Well, I was into castles and crusaders then. I remember being gobsmacked when I was told it was actually a school. It was huge. You could have got 3 of my junior schools on that front lawn alone. So impressed was I thought, that's the place for me. And that was my introduction to Bolton School. So when the time came, I duly passed my 11 plus and the entrance examinations for both Bolton School and the Catholic equivalent, Thornley. To a 10-year-old, Thornley had a lot going for it. The teachers seemed to be monks, dressed in robes like characters in Robin Hood. However, on passing both examinations, I decided go to the castle, much influenced at that time by the TV series Ivanhoe. And on my first day there is something of an understatement. The place was massive. Armed with my Parker 48 fountain pen and a technical drawing set that rattled away in my otherwise empty, brand new leather satchel, I walked through the gates into a whole new world. There were teachers in mortarboards and long capes, like Billy Bunter. There were sergeants who had no doubt served time in the war, and burly school monitors who were directing operations, getting the new intake signed in as quickly as possible. I didn't really get off to a good start. I was approached by one of the burly teachers, a Mr. Kirk, I later found out, and ordered to go up the stairs. Fair enough, you may think. However, what he didn't tell me is where the stairs actually were. How was I to know? Looking round, the only thing I could see that vaguely looked like stairs was a rickety old fire escape. So up I went. I'd got to around the 3rd floor and was feeling a little dizzy when I heard a voice shouting up, "Not there, boy! Get down!" I didn't think he meant me, so I carried on my ascent, pretending the satchel I had on my back was a parachute and reassuring myself I could do it. A few seconds later, I heard another voice bellowing for me to get down from there, and this time I knew it was meant for me. I turned round and realised this was probably the highest I'd ever been. Clinging to the side of the steps, I made my way down, much to the amusement of my fellow newbies. When I eventually found my classroom, I was somewhat disappointed that I'd been put in a class, Shell A2, that wasn't in the castle part at all. The front wing of the school had yet to be built, and I found myself in a prefabricated building, much like the one I'd left at my primary school in Lee Street. Much of the morning was taken up filling out timetables, maths, history, geography, English, French, and what? Latin? Well, I'd actually picked up a few words of Latin at church, so I was beginning to feel settled. Then we put games, PE, and what? Swimming? Oh, no. At home, we used to live directly opposite Atherton Baths, and I went to a cross regularly. Not to swim, for the penny sweets and jammy dodgers they sold. Nah, swimming wasn't for me. We used to play around the backs at the time, and at the back they had a huge bottle of chlorine, or whatever they put in the water, and it stank. The very idea of actually getting in the water containing that stuff was a no-go for me as far as I was concerned. End of. Or so I thought. I think our first proper lesson that day was French. So when the time came, a very French, Norman-looking man came striding in, bedecked in his gown, and he started speaking French. For a while I thought, oh, this is going to take a little getting used to. But after 10 minutes or so, he introduced himself as Mr. Tapman, or rather, Monsieur Tapman, although he was in fact English. One of his hands-on approach was to give us all French surnames, which we were to answer to. It worked like this. If your surname was Johnson, you'd be called Fille de Jean. Excuse me, French, and so on. One I particularly remember was a boy whose last name was Stone, and he was to be Caillou, and it went on and on. We'd all been given exotic, garlic names. All we needed were black berets, striped shirts, and a bicycle bedecked in onions. And no time at all, we thought, we'd be speaking like Charles de Gaulle. I must confess I was a bit disappointed when my allotted name was actually my real name, Martin, just done in a French accent, Martin. I'd been expecting some French crusader name or something from the Battle of Hastings, but no, Martin it was, and that was it. No grave or acute accents to be seen. C'est la vie. A few weeks proceeded quite pleasantly, with most of my class getting on quite well, although I did notice some were more pally than others. The reason being they had attended a junior school on Park Road, the existence of which was unbeknown to me at the time. English was pretty straightforward. As a child, I was a compulsive reader. Maths was okay, no great problem, and so on. Then came the day I'd been dreading, swimming. Oh no. And to make matters worse, our swimming instructor was a stocky, no-nonsense man who had no doubt been a sergeant major at some point, possibly World War I. He was actually called Mr. Hart. And I don't know if it was true or just a silly schoolboy jape, but we were all under the impression his first name was Alf. So when we said his full name quickly, well, it made us all giggle. The giggling soon stopped, however, when we were asked to put on our trunks and get in the water. But first, for some reason, we had to walk through a freezing cold shower. We were all given a polystyrene float and shown the basic arm and leg movements of the various styles, although beginners were later to stick to the basic breaststroke. The first time I tried it, I went straight under. Must have been all of 3 foot deep, but it was a certain amount of floundering around. My float had floated off, and as I went to retrieve it, I saw Mr. Hart through a heavily chlorinated eye and a dreadful smell up my nose. And he was looking at me. He had a huge pole in his hand, and at the end of the pole was a gigantic hook. "Don't worry about that, lad. I would have got you," he said, in a less than reassuring way. I didn't really have any intention of being fished out like one of those ducks on the fairground with my arms flapping around. And from that day forth, I decided that at all costs and by all means, my swimming activity was to be kept to a minimum. 0, in fact. I think maybe I accidentally went to a couple more sessions after that, I was amazed to see some of my classmates actually enjoying it. Some shot up and down the pool, doing lengths at a remarkable speed and with amazing grace, while I was content to just wallow in the shallow end with my float and carefully avoiding eye contact with Althart. Still makes me giggle to this day. It was relatively simple. I just asked what conditions you need to have to get barred from actually going in the water. One was having a verruca, which sounded simple but could easily be checked. The other was a perforated eardrum, which wasn't as easily verifiable, certainly not without specialised gear. So one morning I asked my mother to write me a note saying I'd got a perforated eardrum, and she agreed, although she was rather reticent about having to do it. Once I had the original, it was relatively easy, with the aid of carbon paper, to knock off as many as I liked, although how Mr. Hart didn't spot the work of a 10-year-old forger is beyond me. And that's how it stayed, really. I never did learn to swim, although funnily enough, the actual moves stayed with me. And many, many years later, on a deserted Aegean beach, I actually went in the water and started paddling around, and then I started swimming. Did the 1 hour lesson I'd actually remembered work? Thank you, Mr. Hart. The rest of the academic year went reasonably smoothly, although not particularly spectacularly. I'd made friends with quite a few fellow pupils who took the 82 bus to Atherton, and we used to cut through Queen's Park to get to the bus station on Howell Croft. The winter of '62 was quite harsh, and the park was great in the snow. Possibly the closest I came to death, though, was one morning as I slid on one of the frozen ponds. The ice gave way and I sank up to my ankles. Not particularly dangerous per se. However, I had to spend the rest of the day in frozen shoes and socks, and subsequently developed a raging cold, which earned me a week off school. Academically, I was pretty good, although the teachers didn't seem to think so. My grades varied between B and D, and my class position averaged mid-20th out of 32. The elevated position I'd enjoyed at my time at junior school was no more. These guys were good.